Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick with Herbal 411 Highlights. I just got my 15 minutes of hell exercise out and I am going to prepare for the conference today, but somebody sent me a message earlier yesterday about if they build muscle, will they be able to control their diabetes and their cholesterol issues better? And yes, muscle does do it. Resistance in particular, but you can do it with cardio. And this is how I want to explain it. So essentially what happens in your body is you take stuff from the outside, you put it to the inside of the body. Then you take stuff from the inside of the body, you put it into the cell. Now the stuff that we're talking about, it breaks down into essentially macronutrients. That's what food is made of. And now some of you are doing a little bit too much of the processed food. Processed food has no macronutrients, just useless calories. And that's how, well, we'll talk about that at a later date. But if you essentially break stuff down, their food down into macros, the macros get digested in the stomach and they get absorbed into the bloodstream. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Now, those are the three building blocks, macronutrients, that usually are very well utilized by your body. Now, protein, you shouldn't be using that as fuel. So if you've ever seen somebody that's lost a massive amount of weight and they look kind of gaunt and sick, that's because they're also losing weight from breaking down muscle. We don't want that, so I'm putting that off to the side. What we want to use is carbohydrates and fats to be developed into glucose and free fatty acids. That's the energy packets that you need to go through life. Move muscle, have your heart beat, work on neurological impulse, make hormones, rebuild the gut. So all that stuff is important. Glucose, free fatty acids. Now, glucose and free fatty acids, as I said, acts as your energy source. So it has to be broken down into ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is your energy source. Now, the question is, where do you put that? Because you don't always process, not all of the systems of the body work all day long. Your activities can predict where you're going to store this ATP. If you're going to put it in muscle, cool. Thus, the reason why exercise is important, because if you deplete your ATP stores, when you eat again, you replete your ATP stores. So ATP, once it's furrowed to the different places, muscle, liver, and adipose or fat cells, it can be re-established for energy later. Now, when you put it into muscle, that's what's good about exercise, whether it's resistance or it's cardiovascular. Muscle, which is not just talking about biceps, I'm talking about all the skeletal muscle of the body. It can actually store energy for later, especially if you're going to run from a saber-toothed tiger. If you don't train muscle to do what it's born to do, then it loses its instinctual drive to deplete and then rebuild, deplete and rebuild. So it's always nice to have that kind of cycle going on. And here's the cool thing. For those of you who are diabetic, you know that if you have too much glucose or fuel, that you might have to increase your insulin because you need insulin to put the glucose into the cell. Now, here's the trick. Muscle doesn't need insulin. It's the one cell of the body that doesn't need insulin. It's a built-in trigger because if you had to wait for the pancreas to make insulin and then the insulin to float around to all the cells of the body and then get the glucose in, if you're in a fight or flight situation, that's going to take milliseconds and that could end up in death. Saber-toothed tiger eats you. So that's why the muscle has this built-in back door where it doesn't need insulin. So if you're exercising and your glucose is up to here, when you exercise, you don't need insulin. You don't have to wait for that system to work. You can actually get the glucose down, stored in the muscle. Doesn't have to be burned. It can be stored. And then your serum or your blood level goes down immediately. For those of you who don't have diabetes, you just have insulin resistance. The reason you have insulin resistance is because you have constant levels of glucose that are just floating around in the body, in the blood. And when that is always high, the pancreas says, whoops, gotta make insulin. Eventually you become insulin resistant, and that's the setup for diabetes. The other problem that sometimes happens is the liver can also store glucose in the form of glycogen for just in case you need it later on, like infection or running from saber-toothed tiger. The problem would be if you have too many fuel packets going into the liver, it becomes fatty. That's the fatty liver. It's usually associated with diabetes, prediabetes, high cholesterol. We don't want that. It's a setup for liver failure hepatitis, other things later on down the line. And finally, it's adipose tissue. So this is supposed to be your storage battery. But if we constantly have the wrong kind of macros, then the battery gets too big, and that is tummy. That is love handle. That is adiposity. And if you have enough fat developed the wrong way, that actual apron in the belly becomes another gland, and it just sets up for a metabolic syndrome. So the reason I tell my patients to exercise, to at least try something 15 minutes, 3 days a week, is to stimulate this guy to do what it has to do. If you ride a bike on a regular basis, the gears get oiled and lubricated. The chain stays lubricated. It's good for the bike. Same thing with muscle. If you can have muscle that does what it's supposed to do, it'll be a more efficient system. That also is the gut. That also rubs off on the immune system. It's just beautiful. So if you do enough of the day stuff, then you'll also have a deep night's sleep. If the brain rests at night, it can also supply you during the day without fatigue. So that's why I would suggest a coach to get you to your summit. It's really common to just unload the planning to the doctor. And if the doctor has no time, your planning will be short-tailed. And the only treatment for the plan will be a prescription. If you want to change your life, you have to do stuff on your own outside of medical insurance. And that's where I have my coaches really get people to success. A lot of the time I spend with my patients, whether it was from before in the office or now with my new internet-based medical practice, it's to give people success. I can put together the framework of what you can do where you're from, but you have to get somebody to help you, because I ultimately think other things get in the way. Your routine gets destroyed because you're too busy. That's a common response. So don't feel bad. But sometimes when you have somebody else watching your butt, it makes you engage and maintain and sustain. So hopefully this gives you a couple of ideas of how exercise of some sort, as arduous as it is a good investment. So don't forget to subscribe to me on my YouTube channel. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next Herbal 411 highlights.